Welcome to the WikiLeaks Press Conference on CIA Vault 7 dark matter and associated issues, which we will get to in the questions. Today, March 23rd, 2017, WikiLeaks releases CIA Vault 7 dark matter, which contains documentations for several CIA projects, including of that name, that infect Apple Macintosh computer firmware, meaning the infection persists even if the operating system is reinstalled. Developed by the CIA's Embedded Development Branch, EDB. These documents explain the techniques used by the Central Intelligence Agency to gain, quote, persistence, unquote, on Apple Macintosh devices, including Macs and some iPhones, and demonstrate their use of EFI/UEFI and firmware malware. What does that mean? That means that this is a malware technique developed by the CIA to insert its malware and viruses into people's computer systems, Macintosh computer systems, which doesn't store itself on the regular hard drive that people use, so that even if you throw away your hard drive and reinstall your operating system, the malware persists. In fact, the development notes of the more recent versions of this malware show that the CIA believes that the malware will even persist across quote, infector, is stored on modified firmware of an Apple Thunderbolt to Ethernet connector. That is a device made by Apple to produce, it's like a USB dongle, a dangerous dongle in this case, to connect to the Ethernet. And the CIA has modified that to use it to take over the computer system at boot time before the Mac firmware password is demanded. Another CIA project that we have published today, Dark Sea Skies, is, quote, according to the CIA, an implant that persists in the EFI firmware of an Apple MacBook Air computer and consists of dark matter, CP, and night skies. These are, respectively, EFI, kernel space, and user space implants. What does that mean? That means that you shouldn't think of CIA malware as simply one program that is one little virus that connects to a system and does one job. In fact, there is effectively a malware ecology that has been developed by the Central Intelligence Agency over the last decade, with many different interacting components, some that are infection, embed itself into a Macintosh device so that it couldn't be cleaned out and so that it could hide from antivirus products. And even if you didn't have an antivirus product that detected it, that you might suspect that there's a problem and reinstall your operating system. But by using this EFI method, the CIA is able to keep Triton embedded into Apple Macintoshes across upgrades. While the Durstake manual released today is from 2013, other WikiLeaks Vault 7 documents show that, which we have linked to in our press release, show that as of 2016, the CIA continues to rely on and update these systems and is working on the production of Durstake 2.0, which includes advancements on some of these methods. The efforts there are documented in one of the CIA wiki development pages, which we released last Tuesday, but which has not been remarked upon. Also included in this release is the manual for the CIA's Night Skies, which is a, quote, beacon/loader/implant tool for the Apple iPhone. What's a beacon? It's a system used by intelligence agencies starting back in as early as the 1950s, where you would put a bug, say, in someone's car, and it would give off radio signals, and through that you could track it. Well, modern beacons infest things like iPhones, and they report back over the internet where the iPhone is, other stats on the iPhone back to the CIA, saying, here I am, I'm awaiting instructions, give me more instructions. Noteworthy is that Night Skies had reached version 1.2 by 2008. So that means it had been in the process of development for some time by 2008, but it is expressly designed to be physically installed onto factory fresh iPhones. Not an iPhone that has been stolen from you by a CIA asset and then implanted with this material, but in an iPhone before you even get it. That is not saying possibly some other applications as well from reading these documents, other interdiction methods, which is, say, for example, if the CIA has an asset, maybe it will give one of these phones to its asset, or give them to the asset to give to someone else. Okay, so that's the new release for today. I want to put it into some political context, and I find this very important. There's a lot of good technical publications like Wired, Motherboard, and so on, and these technical publications concentrate on the technology, and they're all a bit in love with the technology, and these publications are in fact very easy to, unfortunately, politically fool through the use of euphemistic code words, which are perceived to be funny. For example, there were several Japanese smileys in the publications we produced on Tuesday. But because they're technical publications, they specialize in technical aspects, not looking at how those technical aspects connect to the institutional, political and geopolitical components that, of course, involve any large organization like a Central Intelligence Agency, which has to fight for budget and depends on particular alliances within a state and without a state and between states to do its work. So let's pull back. Yes, the Central Intelligence Agency has produced methods of infecting Apple Macintoshes, which are used all around the world, and iPhones, and it has quite has a very considerable effort to do that through its embedded development branch, but also other branches, and there's a lot more material on that to come. What we've produced today with dark matter is just a small example. But the Central Intelligence Agency is the largest intelligence agency in the world. Now, it's an an organization with tens of thousands of people. There's many good people in there. There's internal divisions about some of the unethical practices that are being conducted. And every country that wants to be independent and determine its own CIA should be broken into 1,000 pieces and splintered to the wind because it had gotten so out of control. This lack of control comes about in a very obvious manner. You have a secretive agency, and secrecy, of course, breeds corruption normally, but you have an agency which trains its people to lie and to engage in cover-ups and clandestine activities. So already you have an agency whose staff receive values and expertise that make them very hard to manage and very hard for there to be internal accountability. And then, because the CIA crept from being an agency which reports on what is going in the world, potentially a positive thing to understand the world and produce comprehensible reports about what is occurring, to an agency which reports on the world and then commits actions to overthrow governments, to influence elections. The Cornell University report from last year says that the Central Intelligence Agency and associated agencies in the United States since 1949 have interfered in more than 81 elections around the world, not including coups. It then became an agency which reported on its own activities in the world and recommended what activities to conduct. So this means that the agency The CIA is more known because it's more directly involved in political action, but the National Security Agency was doing vastly more electronic spying, and as a result it had a larger budget and it could fight for its place at the budgetary table. Since 9/11, the Central Intelligence Agency has overtaken the National Security Agency as the budgetary dominant intelligence agency within the United States. Its budget is now about 1.5 times that of the National Security Agency, so the position has been reversed. As a result of that tax largesse, the Central Intelligence Agency has increased its institutional ambitions to the point where it is rivaling the Air Force now by commanding its own worldwide drone fleet. It is in some ways rivaling the FBI, not so much internally in the United States, or it does provide support to internal operations, but by being an armed force outside the United States, conducting interrogations, renditions, torture, at least for a period, applications iPhone last September. That information has come out. You can find it if you search for it. If you search for it hard on some dark site. It's a very interesting question. Who's done that? I speculate probably Ukrainian intelligence agency, but it's not entirely clear who's done it. But it does show just how invasive it is, because people now put nearly all of their lives, and not all of their lives, but they put a substantial fraction of their life, their most intimate communications with others, where they are, their thoughts as they search for things, into one device, a smartphone. And so where a smartphone is hacked, not only can they be hacked, but once they are hacked, because of the unification of chat systems, communications, etc., video into one smartphone, the large extent of the life is exposed. Okay, let's move to questions. Thomas Fox Brewster, security reporter from Fox News, says, you made demands of tech firms before handing over CIA exploits. What were those demands, and has the info been handed over? Well, I think demands is a bit of a strange word to use. This is a serious business. These exploits that have been produced by the CIA can affect millions and millions of people. So it has to be done cautiously. There have to be security channels involved, and there has to be agreements that the vendors will in fact be responsive and will produce security fixes. WikiLeaks has no obligation. We're a publisher. We specialize in investigating, publishing, and fighting to secure sources and for the rights of journalists and others to freely express themselves. So this is not our business, but we work for us. It is my view that the security teams are actually very responsive and doing a good job at the major organizations. In some, there has been hold-up at the legal end and possibly the political end. And I'll just go through a chronology. On March the 12th, we contacted Mozilla, Google, Apple, and Microsoft. Cisco was also very proactive, and one of their lead security engineers contacted us proactively. Some of you will have noticed that they put out an advisory day before yesterday on one of the CIA exploits, which affects more than 300 types of Cisco routers, that has permitted Cisco to alert its users so they can disable that service, Telnet, which is has the hole which the CIA or anyone else can use to, in theory, exploit to get into these systems. We didn't publish the exploit itself, but a description of it, and that description was enough for Cisco to work out what it was. The same day, March the 12th, Mozilla replied agreeing to our terms. So what were the terms? Nothing surprising there. Industry standard 90-day response plan. So within the computer industry, there's been a debate over the years about what happens when someone finds a 0-day or security weakness in a computer system that that we use to underpin modern life. Many people use. Should you just give it to the manufacturer and say nothing and wait? Should you just publish it straight away? So everyone is aware of the problem and can take steps to deal with it. Well, the problem is if you publish it straight away to everyone, and there is actually a lot to be said for that. The problem is that all the good guys get it at the same time as all the bad guys get it. And therefore you've got a race condition between the good guys and the bad guys. Now, large organizations have dedicated computer security teams, and they can respond quickly and effectively to such notifications about vulnerabilities, and they do it all the time. But smaller organizations don't, so they can be ignorant or just unaware, or they don't know what to do, so they have to wait for some fix from the manufacturer. Okay, well, what about if you just give it to the manufacturer? You give notification of the vulnerability that you've found. What happens then? And you just wait for a fix. Well, they don't fix it. That's been the long experience of people, security consultants who have found these things. They just don't fix it. Why? Because there's not pressure to do it, it costs money, it's embarrassing, etc. So over time, the industry has evolved to and we were responsive. March 13, Google acknowledged receipt of our initial approach, but didn't address the terms. There's no, we didn't demand money from these organizations, etc. All that is in our terms is the standard industry terms. You've got 90 days. We need a secure point of contact, encryption keys to make sure that when we communicate this information to you, other people can't get at it. This is a high security, very delicate business. It's not something that involves just throwing out emails to random parties within an organization. March 15, MikroTik contacted us. MikroTik makes a controller that's widely used in voice over IP systems, which the CIA targets. March 17, Mozilla provided first feedback to us, asked for more files. March 18, we told Mozilla that we're looking for them. March 20 was the first contact from Microsoft. Not agreeing to the standard terms, but pointing to their standard procedures and a PGP email. Same day Google replies, pointing to their standard procedures in a PGP email. So it's a bit coincidental that there's this 8-day delay, and then both Google and Microsoft respond. Has been at the legal and perhaps political level. Why is that? Well, my belief is that, and it has been argued by others, is that that Microsoft, Apple, Google, etc., have a number of contracts with the US government. In fact, Google is declared to be part of a member of the Defense Industrial Base. I've written about that in a book about Google. You can search for Google is not what it seems for that essay. And the kind of computer security people that you need to understand this are frequently involved in a revolving door with military and intelligence contractors. And so they often have security clearances, and a bizarre and frankly counterproductive standard has arisen in the United States, which makes it hard for security workers and some people within the security agencies to look at and share published information where there is a claim that information derives from classified US government documents. It's been enormously counterproductive. We've seen it in several of our publications. And it's used also for political reasons, to tell intelligence agency workers and contractors involved in the US intelligence community that they're not allowed to read WikiLeaks, they're not allowed to read the New York Times when it publishes information about abuses that are occurring in intelligence agencies derived from our material or independently sourced. So it's a dual purpose. It's used to prevent people in the intelligence community from having intellectual exposure to arguments about why their organization is doing poorly, and at the same time to security flaws in their products that can be pervasive and affect everyone. So they have systems to turn those around very quickly, sometimes a matter of days. Other times they get lazy or distracted, or the security flaw affects a system that is involved in many other systems, and then therefore it requires extensive testing before the patch is sent out, because you could have a security flaw in your security flaw, and that has happened in the past. Sorry, you could have a security flaw in your fix to the security flaw, and that has happened. And so those can take a few weeks. But we're giving them 90 days, which tends to be on the upper end of the disclosure timeline. Of course, in a particular case, if a manufacturer writes to us and says that this particular flaw, this particular vulnerability that the CIA is exploiting is extremely difficult to fix in practice, extremely difficult to create a patch for, and they need more time to test it and roll it out, etc., then that's a dialogue we can have. Jeff Peggs from CBS News: why did you release the documents on Tuesday? Could you comment on the timing? That's clearly referring to Vault 7 Part 1, our first release of the CIA documents, which you can find at wikileaks.org/CIAV7P1. That's CIAV7P1. Well, I mean, this question, unfortunately, is like many questions that I feel are politicized. Instead of looking into what information has been released, which is extensive, more than 8,000 documents, in this case from the Central Intelligence Agency, and what that implies and who it might affect and what people can do about it to remediate it, or what does it say about where these kind of intelligence exploits are going, it tries to erect some kind of what seems to me to be a conspiracy theory about the timing to distract from the content. I think that is unfortunate. In the initial press release, we document exactly why we released an intelligence publication in history. So how these things go is you do a survey of the material you have, then you concentrate on more in-depth surveys of particular parts. You try and understand who in the world is the best or has the best expertise at understanding that. Can they be trusted to keep material confidential during the research phase? Do they have the necessary OPSEC, the necessary operational security? Can they secure themselves while they do this research? That's a really hard problem, because look at what we're publishing. It's about not only the Central Intelligence Agency, but that precise section, at least at the moment, of the CIA, which is involved in hacking people. So how are journalists going to securely receive information from us? How are they going to securely work on it? How are they going to securely coordinate? Well, we have answers to those questions for people that we are very used to working with. We've built up encrypted contacts and so on, but it's quite hard for many journalists to understand how to research a topic like this and keep themselves secure. So to summarize, there's probably a year of publications, I would say, moving. It's included informants, it's included flying FBI agents and prosecutors into Iceland, it's included transnational payoffs to informants, it's included getting people to wear wires. It's a really outrageous investigation that most of it was conducted under the administration of Barack Obama, sadly. Now, over time, there's been some embarrassment about that continued investigation by the DOJ. It's why I have political asylum from Ecuador. The United Nations, twice in the last 12 months, has said that my ongoing detention is illegal under international law, the binding international law that the UK is part of, and Sweden. But formally, it continues on. And there was a statement recently that that grand jury process has now been expanded to include this recent publication of Vault 7 material. It's not clear whether that is concentrating on the alleged sources for the material or whether it is also going to look at the publisher and the journalists involved. Now, you might think, well, okay, after Barack Obama gave Chelsea Manning, or promised to give Chelsea Manning a clemency, she's going to be released, predictably disastrous results. So as a result, there was a lot of opposition within the Democratic Party to Barack Obama pardoning Chelsea Manning under the basis that this is what I had campaigned for, it's what WikiLeaks had campaigned for a long time. It would basically be giving WikiLeaks a free kick. So we wanted to make it so it wasn't a free kick, so that it could be argued within inside the Democratic Party that I will suffer, or WikiLeaks will suffer. And so he said, okay, if you do that, then I will come to the United States if he's pardoned, etc. Now he hasn't been released. That's May 19. But I'm very happy to engage with the process in the United States, provided my rights are respected. Why is that? WikiLeaks is a publisher. I'm a publisher. We have the UN on side. I formally have political asylum. This is a completely absurd case against me and possibly our staff. They've certainly been swept up in it. It's a completely absurd case. We wrote to Loretta Lynch. We've written to DOJ many times asking them to drop the case. We wrote again to Loretta Lynch shortly before the November 8 election, asking her again to drop that case because it's unconstitutional under the First Amendment. It's something that it creates a worrying precedent that can affect all journalists and publishers. And under 2015, let's put it a different way, both on the from the Republican-aligned media groups and from the Democrat-aligned media groups. It's, I think, a very sad situation to see an organization like the New York Times, MSNBC, HBO's Bill Maher, giving space to well-known conspiracy theorists like, for example, Louise Mensch, simply because they are saying something that attacks the other side. That's a real fall down in the standards, in journalistic standards. I'm not one of these people who believes the mainstream media, the establishment media, was once okay and is now bad. It's always been bad, frankly, if you have high standards. Let's look at the New York Times. We can go back to 1917, where the New York Times was campaigning to put Eugene Debs in prison editorially, not just op-eds, but through its editorial board, campaigning to put Eugene Debs in prison for saying that Americans shouldn't take part in World War I, because America didn't have, was it really in the interest of the people who were being shipped off to World War I to fight and die in the trenches in France? Was it actually in their interest or someone else's interest? It's a matter of debate, but it's a speech act. And the New York Times campaigned to put him in prison under the Espionage Act. That same Espionage Act that is spoken about in relation to Hillary Clinton and me and these other sources that are appearing in the Washington Post and New York Times. So that's unfortunately when things are serious and reach to a high level, that media organizations, they have their alliances, and the people who work in them, they have their alliances. That's not new. What is new is how conspicuous and how compelled those biases seem to be, that increasing politicization. So this kind of stuff comes from that. Tax returns, we call for Donald Trump's tax returns publicly and privately with our sources during the election multiple times, after the election. Of course, it is unusual and indeed pull back. This is really fascinating. So the internet was a creation of the US industrial, military, intelligence, academic complex. That's where it comes from. And it was then corporatized, democratized, and commodified. And as a result, it became very cheap, and lots of people became involved, and it became a space where people could easily publish. And the easiest type of publishing on the internet is social media publishing. But because the internet is one standard protocol, and it's only 220 milliseconds from New York to Nairobi, it means that one company can start expanding itself over that entire region, because there's no locality. It's not like a manufacturer of apples, for example, where the apples start to decay. The Facebook can get its data from a data center in New York to a user in Nairobi in a fifth of a second. Opponents, it's large companies acting against its interests by introducing, from an establishment perspective, uncontrolled popularism, where you don't know where that leads, and you've seen partly where it leads. It leads to people who are not already accepted widely as establishment candidates from beating existing establishment candidates. They're approved of the major sections of establishments in different countries. So in response to this outbreak of popularism, Google and Facebook formally have announced that they are going to introduce a system to be used in the French election, explicitly in the French election, to stop what they say is fake news. Now, fake news is a real phenomenon. Fake news has been around for a long time. It exists in two forms. One is the obvious form. For example, in the US election, there was fake news that the Pope had endorsed Donald Trump. Strictly false. The headline was false. The major underpinning of the story is false. But similarly, Washington Post and New York Times had headlines that were fake news, disastrous, that ended up killing and displacing millions of people, about the Iraq War. And every day, large press organizations pump out fake news, either in detail or in the headline. Usually not quite as obvious as that Pope example. So the judgment as to what is fake news, someone has to do it. And there's cases where many people can agree on. For example, that case with Donald Trump and the Pope, that's clearly fake. There's no, not really any angle you could take where that is true. And then others which are value judgment. So the organizations which Google and Facebook have pulled into this endeavor to police the French election all, of course, have particular angles. Nearly none of them are French, for a start. It's, have you been in direct contact with Apple? If so, did Apple respond? Yes, we have, and yes, Apple has. We have good intercommunications with their security teams. As I said, above that, things are a bit politicized, but I think now the political approach has been solved, and so we're just down to a healthy technical interaction. Okay, that's it. This was the WikiLeaks press conference on Dark Matter, 23rd of March 2017. If you're a source and you have documents and you want to give them to WikiLeaks or archives, go to wikileaks.org. There's a submit button there. Press that. It will give you instructions on how to securely send us information. If you want to speed up WikiLeaks publication process and help us defend against this legal case involving this new grand jury in relation to this current publication, you can go to wikileaks.org and there's a donate button. We're tax deductible in the United States through the Freedom of Press Foundation, which is mentioned there, and in Europe-wide through the, or rather EU-wide through the Wow Holland Foundation. If you're a tech company and you haven't made a successful contact with us yet in relation to the CIA's attacks on your systems, if you perceive, looking at our publications, that they might be there, please email security@wikileaks.org. That's security@wikileaks.org. You can also have a look, and everyone might want to do this, you can also have a look at the WikiLeaks Research Community Challenge number 2. That is to go through the Vault 7 materials that we are publishing, pull out all the names of the companies and computer systems and phone types and routers that are affected by these CIA attacks, and document which pages are there. That will help us contact the manufacturers. It will also help the manufacturers see that they're affected, and will help people try and avoid those products that have weaknesses. Just search for WikiLeaks Research Community. We've tweeted out several links about that. You can also go back through our tweets and have a look. There's a you can also go to Reddit, reddit.com/r/WikiLeaks. There's some discussions on there as well. There's a collaborative chat channel also on Matrix, which is listed in the tweets and also on that Reddit page. You can also go to .org, that's our.wikileaks.org, which is a wiki. It's not something that WikiLeaks staff approve. It's from the open crowdsourced research community, so we don't approve of what's written there, but it's getting more cohesive and accurate. And go to our.wikileaks.org. You can look at Vault 7, and the research community project is listed there. My name is Julian Assange. That's it. Thanks, guys. Bye.